swag vibe, baby.
Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I am really excited to talk to my guest today, Ryan B. Ryan has been walking the road of recovery since August 19th, 2011. Ryan's married to Jessica, who recently celebrated 15 years of sobriety. Definitely a recovery power couple. A proud dad and granddad. Ryan has a 32-year-old daughter, Mackenzie, 2 grandkids, Knox and JJ, and he and Jessica are raising their energetic toddler, Mason. His family includes a lovable 9-year-old pit bull, and he still carries the memory of Peanut, who passed away just 7 months ago. When he's not attending AA meetings weekly, sponsoring guys, or staying rooted in his faith community at Fellowship Middlebrook, you'll probably find Ryan in hot yoga, hiking in the Smokies, or cheering on his beloved Tennessee Vols. Professionally, Ryan owns Spry Strategies, specializing in hybrid polling, consulting, and market research. Whether it's in recovery, business, family, Ryan brings clarity, connection, and a whole lot of heart to everything he does. And I have to mention, because I mentioned it to Ryan before we started, that I knew Ryan early on. Ryan was sober before me, and he was one of the guys that I looked to who really gave me hope. So I'm really grateful to have him on the podcast today. Grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm good, Joe. Thanks for the kind words in the intro, man. I appreciate that. And right back at you, man. I've got fond memories of the early days at the clubhouse for sure.
Yeah, I grew up. I like to say I grew up in Park 40.
No doubt, no doubt.
And Ryan was a steady force there for sure. So tell me, what was it like growing up, Ryan?
Well, I think normally when I tell my AA story, one thing that is kind of a reoccurring theme that is my my inability to want to face life, I guess, like an opposition to reality from a very early age. I have really good memories of my early childhood, but one of the biggest memories, and I'd say traumatic, not so much now, but traumatic then, was my parents got a divorce, and I remember them coming to me, and I was throwing the football in the backyard, and they said they wanted to talk, and to this point, I don't recall any conversation with this type of weight to it, so. And they said they were getting divorced. And I understood. I mean, I was 8 years old, but I understood. I don't know how, but I understood exactly what that meant. And I remember slipping off into the wood. I said, okay. And I walked out and I slipped out into the woods, and I just got lost out in the woods for hours, and it was like, I wasn't crying. I don't recall being upset, but I just slipped off into my imagination, I guess. And so before I ever had drugs and alcohol, I had my imagination. And looking back on it, it's almost like I used that like a drug, honestly, from a very early age. We grew up in West Knoxville. It was a little neighborhood called Stonecrest. And back then, even though it was West Knoxville, Farragut, if you will, there were some bad elements, I remember, in the neighborhood. There was a bit of danger, some kids that were pretty rough, and it seemed like I always was somehow around them. But wasn't scared. I wasn't scared of, the violence. I wasn't scared of perceived alcohol use, maybe drug use even back then. I know that my stepdad, who really raised me, and he passed 5 years ago, but was a great man, and he pursued my mom. Used to leave groceries on the doorstep. We'd come home and there'd be just groceries everywhere and toys for Bo and I, my brother. And my brother was 3 years younger than me, very, very close. And I remember, my mom my mom was his office manager, and he's essentially trying to woo her, I know now. But was just a great man. But I recall seeing that and then realizing that we didn't have any money, right? Nobody's going to leave groceries on your doorstep if you're, very well off. And even though I knew that my mom worked 3 jobs, we didn't have a lot of money. It was very happy in general. When my mom married my stepdad, we immediately had money. He was a physician, an ophthalmologist. So we went from this little, 1,200 square foot house in Stonecrest in West Knoxville to all of a sudden having pretty much everything that we could ever need or want. And with that, every opportunity that you could need or want. And I remember being kind of resentful about that. I didn't really like a lot of the kids with money around me, and so I still found myself hanging out with people that were. It wasn't really about the socioeconomic thing, but maybe it was about the social part of the socioeconomic demographic, if that makes sense, right? It was kids that were a little bit wilder, and I was attracted to that, or kids that were growing up around me that were like me, right? A little wild. So I started getting in trouble. So I got kicked out of Webb Middle School for pot. And went to Farragut, and my parents were extremely strict. I remember they put me through this military style, like get up at 6, jog 3 miles, the whole deal. My parents were the absolute worst Al-Anons of all time early on, but my testing was off the charts. My mom always told me that I tested genius level on my IQ. And so I just coasted through school and, found drugs and just, somehow I was thinking about that earlier today, man. I just had a zero fear about drugs, an unbelievable interest in them. I think partially because I love Pink Floyd, the Grateful Dead, I saw The Wall and was immediately thinking I need to take some acid, I mean, alcohol was there. I certainly consider myself an alcoholic. 1 drop of alcohol and I'm headed to get dope immediately. So I'm just as alcoholic as the next alcoholic whose drug of choice is alcohol. But drugs were my drug of choice. They always had been. But yeah, I started experiencing consequences from a very early age with my using, but it didn't scare me off. I ended up going to rehab 3 times before I turned 17 years old. And I remember, I'd get out, I'd get caught again. Ended up going to a very high profile, if you will, rehab in Atlanta, where I lived in my own apartment when I was 15, which did not work out well for anyone. I can tell you that. It was called Anchor School Recovery. It was a Talbot type system. And, And that's where I learned about a lot of the hard stuff, and just had an incredible interest in it immediately. Got out of there, and then my girlfriend at the time got pregnant. Her name was Julie, and it was a high school sweetheart situation, but we had broken up. We were broken up, but she didn't tell me that. She told me that she got an abortion. And so I'm at a nightclub and at the Underground, and I'm jamming out, dancing, and these girls come up to me and say, "Congratulations, Ryan, congratulations." And I'm, just kind of dancing away. All right, and I was like, "What about?" And they said, "Your daughter." And then they looked at me and they could see that it just shocked me. And they said, "You need to talk to Julie." And I got all my friends. We went back to we were staying at my friend's grandparents for the summer there in Europe, taking real good care of their house, Joe. And went back, and I called and said, I acted like I was a family friend, Jeff. And her sister said, "She's feeding the baby." And dude, my life just changed, like flashed before my eyes immediately. And I went there I remember I got on the phone. I said, "Is it true? And is she healthy? And what's her name?" I asked all the stuff and said, "I'll be there Monday morning." I went there Monday morning right after her parents went to work, and picked her up and just bawled everywhere. She looked like me. It was just a beautiful thing. And so I got my act back together for a long time. And I went to UT, got a degree, wasn't sober, but the wheels weren't coming off. The big book talks about that, sometimes we experience periods of sobriety, usually brief. Well, mine were not brief. I mean, I would go, and it wasn't really sober. I just wasn't destroying my life and destroying the people I loved. So, and all this happened before I was, at this time I'm 18 years old, right? So I've already lived a pretty wild life, right? Before I even turned 18. And, but that's kind of the youthful part of the story. And so and so life growing up, right, it was an adventure with self-imposed crises sprinkled in, I guess would be a good way to term it.
So you you kind of slow down. You're not destroying or burning down the world or the people around you. What changed, Ron? I mean, whether, was there something that changed that caused the burning to start again?
Yeah, I think one of the big things was, one, I found widespread panic. And that coincided with Mackenzie's mother getting remarried and her moving down to Miami. So she moved to Miami, and then I moved to Atlanta, and was plugged in with some very a lot of them ended up being very good friends for a long time, but they were wild. And found widespread panic, and that accelerated my use severely. Severe cocaine addiction. I would go to widespread panic shows and eat, gobs of liquid acid and ecstasy. And after the shows, man, we were just like beasts. I mean, we would rush back to the hotel room with a fierce hunger to use. And the difference was a lot of those guys would get done and go back to school or take care of their family or go back to their career jobs. And I'd get home and wanted to feel just like I did on Saturday night in San Francisco at the Warfield Theater on the 4th of July that following Tuesday, And So I just kind of crashed and burned, and then went back home to Knoxville, and got it back together kind of again. I mean, there was certainly a lot of struggle mixed in. Then I moved to Nashville for a while, and then back to Atlanta, and had a pretty good life, a good career going. And my addiction just it was the beast that could not be contained. And eventually I was using, being good for me was, a 5 hydrocodones, 2 Adderall, smoking pot throughout the day. I wouldn't drink because I knew if I drank, I'd go on a bender. Right. And so I would kind of keep the alcohol at bay, because as soon as I drank, the alarm would go off and I'd be off the races with cocaine for days. And I remember that I was in this really stage of kind of this hot shit stage, or so I thought. I was in North Carolina. I was working. I've been in a political consultant, working high level congressional races and U.S. Senate races, and was winning a lot of them, but was using pretty severely. I went on a bender and was driving home back to Atlanta. And I remember thinking, like it was yesterday, I remember thinking, this is after a horrible 2-day bender, right? Staying up all night when I'm supposed to be talking to congressmen, giving them counsel on what they need to be doing as I'm up all night. And I remember driving back to Atlanta thinking, I've been so good lately. I've just been so good. I deserve to cut loose when I get home. Right. And that was the history. I mean, that voice in my head followed me around my whole life. Right. It was just attached. That, the big book talks about it. We can't bring into consciousness with sufficient force the memory of suffering of a day, week, year ago, 10 years, 5 years ago, were without defense against the first drink. And that was me in a nutshell, man. I could not dredge up the consequences of my using without defense against that first drink. And so that led to an ordeal that led to my bottom, probably the worst day of my life that turned into one of the best days of my life.
Are you comfortable sharing that, Ryan?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah, sure. So I was driving from Atlanta from Raleigh, North Carolina to Atlanta. I had convinced myself that I'd been so good, even though I'd been severely bad. I went to the Greenville Coliseum to see Widespread Panic in Greenville, South Carolina, the Bilo Stadium. I called my dealer, said, I need some stuff. He said, go to the Hilton. There was a guy in the suite up there that was doing this thing. And I got an assortment of things, and went to the show and was having a great time. And then at set break, all of a sudden, man, everything just kind of got evil, to be honest with you. Like, everything I looked at was just starting to be really strange. And so I started getting a little bit scared. I had gone by myself. I knew some people there, but I'd gone by myself, and I was walking out at this point, I'm very scared. I'm trying to find my way out of the Bilo Stadium. I had a lot of stuff on me, so I didn't want to ask cops for directions, Plus, I was in really bad shape. They're like, are you okay? And it's like, no, I'm not. I wound up going on in the Bible saying you go up to go out, and somehow I ended up on this smoking deck, and I'm just hearing all these voices, man, that are saying, God hadn't been fair to you, Ryan. All the pain, all the heartache. What kind of God is that? Do you want to be high forever? Do you want to live forever? Jump off this ledge and you'll never have any more pain. And the next thing you know, I kind of come to and I'm in air. I'm 50 feet. Bam, right? Flat on my back. I shattered my 1 to 3 lumbar. It felt like the anchor of the Titanic was dragging me underneath the ground, man. It was the most horrific pain I'd ever been in. I can see like where I need to go, cop lights, right? Because it's code red, like afraid you're gonna die type code red. And so I kind of crawl. I couldn't really move, but I kind of got on my arms. I was crawling. I landed in grass, and I landed flat on my back, thank God, or I'd be quadriplegic. They were kind of amazed that I wasn't. I'll tell you what happened from there, but I managed to scream, and a cop came over. I'm throwing all my stuff out as I'm crawling like a snake on my belly, getting rid of all the stuff in my pockets. And his name was Officer Hawk. He came up and said, it was like, I need an ambulance, code red, emergency. And they put me in an ambulance, and I wake up like I'm in critical condition for 3 days, not even conscious. And then I was in ICU after that, and I woke up. My whole family is standing by the bed and looking at me, and I made up a lie, Joe, immediately. I was so ashamed of what I did. I jumped, man, and I could not even, I did what I did best. Immediately made up a lie. Faulty construction. I fell. And I remember being that, and everybody's looking at me. And I feel like that everybody's like, that just doesn't make sense, right? But they're not going to question me as I'm in a hospital bed. At this point, they're not sure how severe the injury is. They just know that I've shattered some bone around my spinal cord, and I couldn't move. I was stationary in bed, and they took an x-ray, and they see a particle of my spine that was about to hit my spinal cord, and they rushed me into emergency spinal cord surgery. So I have spinal fusion, titanium in the 1 to 3 lumbar. But I remember going into that surgery, and they shot me up full of fentanyl. And I have never felt so good in my life. I still have fond memories of that shot, right? It was like, I call it the Holy Trinity. It killed the pain, it got me high, and it killed the memory of what I had done, right? And it was just bliss, right? And then they take me in, and I wake up with a tube in my back that's draining fluid, and like from then on, all I remember is begging for another shot, right? And so while this is happening, and they did incredible surgery, they're like looking at my chart going, you shouldn't be alive. I can't believe, I knew when I landed that I was, for a split second when I came to and knew what I'd done, I was like, God, kill me, because I thought I'd wake up a quadriplegic for sure. And, how just courageless right there, quadriplegics. I know some that have made incredible strides with their lives, and I'm like, kill me, God, I don't want, the pain. And, so they did amazing surgery. The doctor comes in, they're like, you're lucky essentially. And I'm like, no, God saved me. And I knew this as I'm lying to everybody about what happened, right? And I knew God saved me. And dude, I'm laying in that hospital going, I know in the back of me, like, this is trouble. Me getting out with a lifetime prescription of opiates is trouble, right? So I got out and I went to my aunt's to recover. And my Aunt Sherry's like a Mother Teresa Jean type woman. She fed me like bone broth and just vitamins and just nursed me back to health. They're managing my pain medicine, right? And then I have to go back to Atlanta, and for a couple of months I do all right with it, right? And then comes that day where it's just not enough. The next thing you know, I'm shooting heroin. I run out of the quote unquote medicine, as I called it, and ran into an old friend. Recovered, was walking 10 miles in 2 months a day to recover. Doing yoga, all kinds of stuff. My back's, it's still strong. I have the back of a 20-year-old and the hips of a 90-year-old. So they doing great, Joe. But I met a friend. I went back to widespread panic right after about 6 months and met an old friend there. And he said, "You really want to kill that pain?" I said, "Absolutely," and I just I remembered that shot, and I just had an attraction to that at that point, and started shooting heroin and smoking crack were my drugs of choice. And in 2 years, man, it was absolute hell. I was making $150,000 a year scraping quarters at the end of the month. Destroyed every relationship that I had, broke my ankle from falling out from, basically passing out from too much opiates, and just, landed on my ankle. I mean, it was just one, like, I had always prided myself on no physical complications. And the next thing you know, I've got, spinal fusion, a broken ankle that didn't heal back right, scratches all over my face, my arms aren't looking great. And my daughter, one day, my daughter's mom called and said, "Do you want to come home?" She just had this intuition that things weren't well, and my heart that day was like, yeah, I do want to come home. And I went home and didn't quite get sober right away. Of course, that led me to working being a liar, cheating, a thief in AA for a couple of months, destroying everybody's hopes that I was sober, doing well. Till one day, I'll go ahead and tell you this one too, because it's kind of the defining moment. I started wanting to get sober, started getting scared. Like, this is getting out of control again, and this isn't right. My daughter is back in my life, and she says, "Dad, you look horrible," and I go to a hotel. I'm on my way to an 8:00 meeting, and I'm praying to God to get me to the meeting because I really wanted to use, but for one reason or the other, I didn't think I wanted to. And I ran into this dude in a hoopty. He looked at me and I looked at him, and it was fate. And I said, "What do you got?" And he said, "What do you need?" And I said, "I'll take this, that, and the other," And that led me into a hotel for 4 or 5 days, a horrible bender. And I was so paranoid. I was looking out the peephole every 30 minutes, and I look out one day and there's a cop there, and I say, I kind of open the door, and he opens it quite a bit more and says, "Ryan, I know what that shit is. I know what you're doing. I'm not here to arrest you. Somebody wants to make sure you're alive." And he pulled the door, and my daughters there. And she put her I had a bottle of vodka, I had stuff all over the table. I looked like a piece of shit, is what I looked like, just pouring sweat. She put her finger in my sternum, and I said, I hope this is an R-rated show, by the way, Joe, because she said, I don't want to see you till you're 10 motherfucking years sober, you piece of shit. What the fuck is wrong with you, Dad? This is sick. This is absolutely sick. And she was right, man. I mean, I had shielded this from her for a long time until, the hospital thing in Greenville. She kind of knew, even though I lied, that it was an accident, but she saw my disease full blown and all of its evil and all of its horror. And I had nothing, man. I went right back in the motel room, closed the door, kept using. And then you heard a voice that said, Ron, better get out of this hotel room. You're going to die. And it was just God just saying, get out. And so I left. My brother picked me up and I went to another hotel and he dropped me off. I'm all alone, destroyed my life again. And I got on my knees and said, God, I'm so tired of doing things my way. That's the way I've always done it, man. Right? I can figure this out my way. Right? I said, I'm tired. I'm ready to do it your way, God. And to me, that was steps 1, 2, and 3 on the floor of that motel on my knees. And I had a glimmer of hope, man. And I knew, I had enough exposure to AA to where, hold on one second. Sorry. I'd had enough exposure to AA that I knew, right? The attraction, not promotion, over the years rubbed off on me. And but I'd never given it a shot. I'd never once given it a shot. I'd just gotten all my shit back, got a job, got a girl, and was doing my thing again. And this time was different, man. I sobered up, went to a meeting at Park 40. It was their anniversary meeting. I hated it. But I went and I kept going back, man, and got busy, man. I got busy with the steps, got a sponsor, did every single suggestion that was suggested to me. And, but that in a nutshell is, my story of what got me into recovery.
So what was it like early on in recovery? Like, what were some of the challenges, Ryan, like early on, if you remember?
I came in, Joe, I had a 400 credit score. I was $275,000 in debt. My daughter had busted me doing hard drugs at a shitty hotel. My entire family had given up on me, with the exception of my little brother, Bo, who just, God love him, he stuck with me the whole way. I was extremely spiritually sick. I was still lying to myself about what happened in Greenville, South Carolina. I had lied, cheat, and stole, and done just so many horrible things that I just had all the weight of that bearing down on me. It looked like it would take me 50 years to make a small dent in any of the damage that I had done. Miraculously, my health, quickly bounced back. I really used exercise as a drug. I'll tell you, man, whether it was yoga or just, I walked all the time. I loved to walk my dog, and would use that time for prayer and whatnot. asked God to keep me sober. But I moved in. I was at that anniversary meeting. Carl Campbell, who died last year, but was a stalwart in AA. His son Morton Campbell, who also died about 3 years ago. He asked me if I was okay, and for the first time in my life, I said I wasn't, and I just vomited the whole story. And he said, "Why don't you come live with me and my dad?" And man, I had a little money in the bank, and like what would seemingly be enough to get a 1-bedroom apartment and pay my bill, and I couldn't figure it out, man. I mean, I was so beat that I just couldn't figure out how to live, and I think God wanted me, or I was right where he wanted me, man. And so naturally, as a good alcoholic, I said, "Let me get back to you Monday," right? I have nowhere to live, but I'll get back to you on Monday. But I called him on Monday, and I had actually used my business card and was staying at a Best Western Plus. It had to be a plus, Joe. That plus was big for this alcoholic. I needed a pool, and I needed 2 meals a day is what I need. You know what I mean? And that hotel had it. So, but I said yes. And I went and lived, and I had this garage apartment in Sequoia Hills, had a saltwater pool. My meetings were 3 of them a week were in walking distance. God rolled out the red carpet for me, even though I had destroyed my life. And I knew, I was like, there's no accident that he put me right here, but saying yes, and really watch Carl Campbell, an incredible example of recovery, and then Morton, a horrible example of recovery. I had both of those in the same house. They lived in, the house. I had the garage apartment, but we shared a kitchen, and Morton would be out smoking, Turkish cigarettes and drinking Turkish coffee, and Carl would be in with his big book in the morning. And for some reason, I took a right and went and sat with Carl and learned how to do it. This is how he does it. This is what I need. I'm going to do it, and so, yeah, I mean, God started piecing my life back together at a rapid rate. That there's some magic in the program with that is not talked about. You've got this agnostic streak running through AA, when the reality of it is that God magically pieces our life back together for us when we don't have the ability to do it, right? And that's through steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And, I had the IRS was after me, and I paid. The financial amends for me were huge, man, because to have the kind of life I have now, which is beyond my wildest dreams, I had to pay people back. I had to pay institutions back. I remember sitting and pulling my credit report one day when I was about 2 years sober. I was like, all right, I'm getting busy on this now. And I had made some personal ones, but the printer would not shut up. It was spitting paper out that had, you owe this, you owe that. I was begging it to stop. And, but it was, a stack of paper, and I started going through it. I called and negotiated with every single one of them. I got $50 now, I know I owe you 1,500, but I got $50, Some people took it, and when they did, I didn't feel the slightest bit bad about settling with Verizon Wireless. You know what I mean? But that was really important for me to do that in order for God to say, okay, now I trust you with a bigger life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's how did you begin to build or rebuild the trust with your family? How did those pieces come back together?
Well, my daughter did not talk to me at all until on my 1-year birthday. Man, she called me when I picked up my 1-year coin and said, "Dad, I'm proud of you." She knew. Like, she was obviously keeping some tabs, you know what I mean? And it was hard for me, man, because at 6 months I wanted to call her, at 9 months I wanted to call her, and I had some really great women in the program that were like, "You need to it's on her terms at this point," you know. One big thing for me, Joe, was, being a man of action with my family. But, I had broken so much trust that it took a long time, years, for my family to trust me again. And I mean, I even think at 3 and 4 years sober, they still had those moments of like looking at me with a little more discernment, And, but, God, to me, God is the one that repairs those relationships as long as I'm working the program. It's a very simple thing. If I'm working the program and made those amends when it was time to make them, that was a big thing for me to, and I went through almost all my personal amends in the first 2 years. They were all done. I had a few that were hanging out there, or ones that I remembered later. A big moment for me was sitting in an AA meeting and hearing people talk about trying to commit suicide, and I just couldn't relate at all to that, I thought. And then all of a sudden, I just had this epiphany, like I jumped off that ledge. It wasn't on my first 4-step. I mean, it would have killed me if I didn't get that out. And so I said it out loud in the meeting while people were talking. I jumped, like it just, and I ran outside and called my sponsor and I said, I jumped, and that was a huge moment for me to acknowledge that what really happened there. And I had a few of those early in sobriety that they weren't on my first or second 5th steps. And then something jarred it loose in an AA meeting. And I realized like that would have killed me. Like I would have drank again without a doubt at some point if that wouldn't have come out.
I think that speaks to, Ryan, to the importance of working the whole program. You never know where. I know, and I think you believe the same as I do. I hear God's voice in the rooms through the people.
Absolutely.
That's where God talks to me, and and so it's so important, to go to meetings, to talk to people, to have fellowship, to pray and work the steps, and be of service, because you never know where you're going to have that next God moment.
That's right.
So, what are some of the best things that have happened to you in sobriety?
Well, my relationship with my daughter is incredible. She has our relationship. I've learned, Joe, that she is exactly like me. And I've also learned that, a lot of the good qualities that I gave her, she has told me that right, Dad, you were not a bad dad I can remember many periods. I had this, I was a horrible dad, an addict. And she's like, I remember very long periods of stability and love. But our relationship is incredible. And, she is exactly like me. It's just crazy. Thank God she's not an addict, right? But she is. I think I scared it right out of her. But our relationship is amazing. She works for me. I made her my vice president. She's incredible at what we do. I watched her make real money last year, and I made real money too, but it was much more satisfying to watch that for her than for me. The whole thing with Jessica, right? I well into sobriety, my relationships were still crap. I mean, I was not fit to be out of myself enough for a woman for a long time, right? And here comes Jessica, whom I thought I hated, and she thought she hated me right back, right? And it was that contempt prior to investigation, man. And I just remember going back, we were kept getting like not matched up, but we ended up at places and we ended up talking, and I'm like, I remember we were after a meeting, went to taste a Thai with some other folks, and I'm on my way home, and I remember thinking, do I like her? Oh my God, I think I might like her, and she was thinking the same thing on the exact same time. And then I remember on our first date, I'm looking at her, dude, and I'm just like, who is this person? Like, I'd had no idea. Like, God removed the scales of contempt prior to investigation from my eyes, and a woman that I had never met, but I had been in the rooms with for 8 years, right? Or 7 years. And so that my marriage to her is really incredible. It took a while, right? But our marriage right now, it's always been on solid ground, but it's never been on more solid ground. And we both have our individual programs, right? Even though I think I know it's right for her almost all the time, and vice versa. I know how it works, The smart thing is I just don't say it all the time, I have an incredible business. My business is very healthy. I started my own business in 2018. A little bit in the same sector of what I had been doing for a long time, but it was one of those things where God just, kind of jarred me loose from what I was doing. And I sat down at Panera Bread one day and literally branded a company, filed with the, freebrandingsoftware.com type stuff, came up with my logo, but the key there was I did a fist up with Daniel Benson, and I had some family relationships were involved in my other business. And I remember him saying, would you rather be resentful at your brother or get over the fear of starting your new business? And it was just such a start of, I want to love my brother, of course. Right. And this is another step brother in Atlanta. But, and so I remember I took a crappy settlement and, but that's what God wanted me to do. And I took a crappy settlement and started my own business, and it has gotten to be pretty successful, and has just really given Jessica and I a lot of stability. And then Mason is the most amazing thing I would say that's happened so far. And Jessica and I Jessica wanted to have a baby. I really wasn't there with it, I felt like I might have been a little more open to adoption, but I wasn't there with that either. But I'd been praying and talking about it, worked some steps on it. And then this is kind of a long story short, but she called one day, her boss's assistant's niece had abandoned a baby in a hospital in Missouri. And she called me and told me about it, and I just said, let's go get him. Like, it wasn't even a question. Let's go get him. And he's an incredible joy. He's an incredibly healthy kid. I'm so much of a better parent this time around, man. I feel my age quite a bit more chasing a toddler all around, He's a tank, man. He's strong as an ox. He's going to be huge. But watching Jessica be a mom and how she's incredible. And also, raising. So I've got my 2 grandkids, and Mackenzie and I are all the time on the phone talking about advice with how to raise kids. And I heard her mom in the background the other day say, who would have ever thought that you two would be having this conversation? And like, you couldn't dream it up, man. And it's all because of God and AA. I mean, there's no question with me that it's God. And her belief in God was strengthened by watching what happened with me, which is another huge thing in my recovery.
It's amazing. Is what would you say to someone who maybe is listening out there, Ryan, who's feeling hopeless, and not sure what to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that, one, there is no addict out there who likes to use drugs more than I do. None, zero. Um, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody as physically, mentally, and spiritually ill that I was, who had more horrible financial consequences bearing down, had nothing, no hope, no family. Nobody believed me. Nobody trusted me. I had, a broken back, broken leg. And I think the simplicity of the surrender of, I'm tired of trying to do it my way. I'm ready to do it your way. And then taking that action will work every time for anybody who tries it. It doesn't matter how far down you're gone. And I've worked with some of those people, and I have some people in my life right now that are seemingly hopeless, right? That's the key word, seemingly hopeless. I do think there's a point where, you get so sick that you could have a hard time with that. That they say that, some people are mentally ill. Even those people recover if they have the capacity to be honest. It doesn't even say you have to be honest, just have the capacity. And dude, I can tell you, I only had the capacity to be honest I was still a liar and a cheat and a thief at 8 months sober, right? My behaviors were terrible, right? And I've dealt with character defects that have sprung up for terrible behaviors. I'm still an addict, man. You should see Jessica and I's supplement cabinet. Like, we've got $10,000 worth of fucking supplements to make us feel better down in you know what I mean? Love my caffeine, and I love it. Yes, I am addicted to caffeine, and I love every second of it. But quit smoking, quit vaping, quit. Now I'm chewing nicotine gum like it's going out of style. I expect to be doing it forever. I have no qualms with that. But yeah, I mean, the program is, I love the God does not make too hard of terms for those who seek him. Right. And that is, I've never met anybody, Joe, including yourself, that it doesn't matter how sick we were, if we seek God through the program, it's not failed once that I've seen. And it's the only thing that works for guys like me. That's what I know. I tried everything under the sun, not to quit, to control. It wasn't about quitting for me, and it was about controlling. And this was the only thing that ever brought any semblance of manageability into my life.
Well, you've got a hell of a life, and
thanks, man.
I'm so glad. I'm so grateful to you, Ryan, for sharing. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to share?
I don't think so, man. I think that, I will say that, it is the program. I feel like that I'm, that we're in the grips of a progressive illness was not for the first time when I read the book. it was for today. I'm still on the grips of a progressive illness. And the program, it's almost like I need the program more than I ever have. You know what I mean? I mean, once you got over the code red sickness, like I just need AA so bad. And so my addiction is live and well. And I mean, I'm just so grateful that I still want the program, right? I've seen so many guys that wake up one day and they're like, F these people. What are they talking? I mean, they're dead. They're in jail. They're coming crawling back to AA with their tail between their legs. And I just, I'm grateful that hasn't happened, man. I still want AA. I still love it. And, Heather G says that I've got to continuously fall back in love with AA. And I've found that to be very true.
Absolutely. Well, I can't let you go without our rapid fire questions, Ryan.
All right. Yeah.
No pressure, sir. No pressure.
All right.
What is your favorite recovery slogan?
Oh, man. I would say, I don't even know if it's an official one, but be true to thine own self, which is on the back of a coin.
Yeah. What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Easy does it.
It should end with, but do it. That's what Tom Wells used to say to me.
That's right.
Easy does it, but do it.
Right.
What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
Being able to work the steps with a newcomer. Translating the book into something somebody can understand.
Absolutely. If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
I love you, man.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
Metallica's Blackened. No, I'm just kidding. Eric B. and Rakim's Paid in Full.
Ooh, nice. If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
Constant memory of how sick I really am. Without beating myself over the head on it. Sorry. Without beating myself
That's okay.
About it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, absolutely. What step do you love the most?
2.
What step do you love the least?
10.
What is one of your favorite movies?
Shawshank Redemption.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
It's about time.
Well, thank you for taking the time today, Ryan. I think you're an amazing guy with an amazing story. And I know you're going to help someone with, hopefully somebody hears this today.
That's what it's all about, Joe. Thanks so much, man. Good to see you. Good to talk to you.
You too. You as well. A new episode is released every Thursday at noon. You can listen to the show in your favorite podcast apps, Apple, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share because someone out there needs to hear this today. Thank you all for listening.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's Experience, Strength, and Hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to the Cup of Joe Show.